The smell of fresh coffee always reminds me that I am safe now. This morning, I stood by my kitchen window watching the sun rise over the city I now call home. 6 years of building this life from nothing. 6 years of healing. Then the doorbell rang. I opened it, and there they stood. My mother and father. The same people who once called me a mistake in front of their friends. Their eyes were red tears streaming down their faces. But before I tell you what happened at that doorstep, let me know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if you have not already. Now let me take you back to the night I lost my family, or more accurately, the night I realized I never truly had one. I grew up in a white two-story house in suburban Connecticut. You know the type. Perfectly trimmed lawn, white picket fence, 2 cars in the driveway. From the outside, we looked like the American dream. My father, Daniel, was 48 years old and worked as a senior partner at a prestigious law firm in Hartford. He wore tailored suits, drove a German sedan, and cared deeply about what the neighbors thought of us. Every decision he made was calculated to maintain our family image. My mother, Patricia, was 46. She owned a small but successful interior design boutique downtown. She loved hosting dinner parties, attending charity galas, and making sure everyone knew how well our family was doing. Her smile was always brightest when guests were around. Then there was my sister, Meredith. She was 5 years older than me, and by the time I was 16, she was already in her 3rd year of medical school. Meredith was everything my parents wanted in a child. Brilliant, beautiful, accomplished. Her photographs covered every wall in our house. Graduation photos, award ceremonies, family vacations where she stood front and center. I used to count the pictures sometimes. There were 37 photos of Meredith displayed throughout the house. There were 4 of me, and 2 of those included her as well. I knew I was different from the very beginning, even before anyone said it out loud. The signs were small, but constant. My bedroom was the smallest in the house, tucked away at the end of the upstairs hallway next to the storage closet. Meredith had the large corner room with windows facing the backyard garden. When Christmas came, her pile of presents reached her waist. Mine barely came up to my knees. When she brought home straight A report cards, my parents threw celebration dinners at fancy restaurants. When I brought home the same grades, my father would glance at the paper and say something like, "Good, keep it up." No dinner, no celebration, just a nod and back to his newspaper. I tried so hard to earn their attention. I joined the basketball team and became a starter by sophomore year. I entered the debate club and won 3rd place at the regional championship. I maintained a 3.8 grade point average while working a part-time job at the local grocery store. None of it mattered. When I told my mother about making the varsity team, she was on the phone with her friend planning Meredith's birthday party. She gave me a thumbs up without looking at me and continued her conversation. When I won 2nd place at the state debate competition, my father's only response was, "Why not 1st place?" I remember standing in the kitchen that night holding my silver trophy, feeling it turn to lead in my hands. My relationship with my father was built on silence and disappointment. Daniel rarely spoke directly to me unless it was to point out something I did wrong or to compare me unfavorably to my sister. Once when I was 14, I asked him to come to my basketball game. It was the championship match, and I was the starting point guard. He said he would try to make it. I looked for him in the stands throughout the entire game. We won by 6 points, and I scored 15 of them. After the game, I searched the parking lot for his car. He never showed up. When I got home, he was in his study working on a case. He did not even ask about the game. My mother was different, but not better. Patricia was never openly cruel. She smiled at me, asked about my day, sometimes even hugged me on special occasions. But there was always something missing. When she hugged Meredith, she would squeeze tight, rock back and forth, stroke her hair. When she hugged me, it felt like hugging a distant relative at a funeral. Polite, brief, obligatory. She remembered every important date in Meredith's life. Her exams, her interviews, her boyfriend's birthday. She forgot my parent-teacher conferences 3 years in a row. She missed my basketball championship. She scheduled a spa day with her friends on my 16th birthday. Meredith was not malicious toward me. She simply did not see me as important. I was the little brother who existed in the background, someone to acknowledge occasionally, but never to prioritize. She once told me during a rare moment of conversation, "You are lucky, you know. Mom and Dad do not expect anything from you. There is no pressure." She meant it as comfort. She did not realize how deeply it cut. To have no expectations meant to have no value. I was not worth expecting anything from, so I learned to become invisible. I stopped asking for attention, stopped hoping for recognition, stopped believing that if I just tried harder, they would finally see me. I told myself that maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was not trying hard enough. Maybe if I won first place instead of second. Maybe if I scored 20 points instead of 15. Maybe if I got into Harvard like Meredith, then they would love me the way they loved her. I carried that belief like a stone in my chest for 16 years. The night everything changed was a Saturday in mid-October. I remember because the leaves had just started turning orange and red, and there was a chill in the air that made you want to stay inside. My parents were hosting one of their famous dinner parties. This was a monthly tradition among their social circle, a group of 8 to 10 wealthy professionals who took turns showing off their homes and their success. Lawyers, doctors, business owners, people who measured their worth in square footage and stock portfolios. My mother had been preparing for days. The house was spotless, fresh flowers on every table, expensive wine chilling in the refrigerator. She hired a catering company to handle the food, but she spent hours arranging the appetizers just so making sure everything looked perfect for the photographs she would post later. Around 6 in the evening, the guests began arriving. I heard the doorbell ring again and again, heard the laughter and greetings echoing up to my room. My mother had told me earlier that day to stay upstairs. "This is an adult party, Isolde. You will just be bored. Stay in your room and do your homework." I did not argue. I never argued. By 9 o'clock, I was thirsty. I had finished my homework hours ago and had been reading a book trying to ignore the sounds of clinking glasses and conversation drifting up through the floor. My water bottle was empty, and I decided to sneak down to the kitchen quickly. I figured I could slip through the back hallway, grab a glass of water, and return to my room without anyone noticing. I was good at not being noticed. I made it halfway down the stairs when I heard my name. Not spoken to me, but spoken about me. I froze my hand gripping the banister, my body pressed against the wall where the staircase curved. From this angle, I could see into the living room without being seen. The adults were gathered on the expensive leather couches, wine glasses in hand, faces flushed with alcohol and good cheer. A woman named Sandra, who I recognized as the wife of one of my father's law partners, was speaking. "What about your younger one, Isolde, right? He seems like a sweet boy." I held my breath, waiting for my mother's response. Patricia laughed, a high tinkling sound that I had heard 1,000 times at these parties. But there was something different in it now, something sharp. "Oh, Isolde," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "He is the family mistake." The room went quiet for a moment. I could see some of the guests exchange uncomfortable glances. Then my father spoke up, his deep voice carrying clearly across the room. "We never planned for a second child. Meredith was enough for us. She was perfect from the start." Sandra looked uncertain, like she wanted to change the subject, but my mother continued. She had that look she got when she was telling a particularly good story, the kind that made her the center of attention. "You know how it is," Patricia said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Birth control is only 99% effective." She paused for dramatic effect, then pointed toward the staircase, toward where I often appeared when I came down from my room. "He is the 1%. The room erupted in laughter. Not nervous laughter, not uncomfortable chuckling, but genuine, hearty laughter, like my mother had told the funniest joke of the evening. I watched my father smile and nod, watched him put his arm around my mother like she had said something clever. I watched the people I had known my entire life laugh at my existence. I do not know how long I stood there. It could have been seconds. It could have been hours. The world had stopped making sense. I kept replaying the words in my head, trying to find another meaning, trying to convince myself I had misheard. But I knew what I heard. I had always known somewhere deep inside. I just never had it confirmed so brutally. My mother had called me a mistake. Not in anger, not in a moment of frustration, but casually as entertainment for her friends. My father had agreed. They had laughed about it together, all of them, like my pain was a punchline. I backed up the stairs silently, my body moving on autopilot while my mind screamed. I reached my room and closed the door, pressing my back against it, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor. I did not cry. I felt like I should cry like any normal person would cry after hearing something like that, but my eyes stayed dry. Instead, there was just emptiness, a vast hollow space in my chest where something used to be. For 16 years, I had told myself that I was not trying hard enough, that if I just worked harder, achieved more, they would finally love me. In that moment, sitting on my bedroom floor, I understood the truth. It was never about what I did or did not do. It was never about my grades or my trophies or my accomplishments. They had decided who I was before I was even born. I was the accident, the unwanted one, the 1%. I do not remember making the decision to leave. One moment I was sitting on the floor, and the next I was standing in front of my closet pulling out my old backpack from summer camp. I moved methodically like I was watching myself from outside my body. I packed 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, underwear, socks. I grabbed the notebook I used for journaling and my favorite pen. I went to my desk drawer and counted the money I had saved from my grocery store job. $40. It was not much, but it was mine. I wrote a note on a piece of loose leaf paper. My hand was steady. I heard everything. Do not look for me. I placed it on my desk where they would find it if they ever bothered to come into my room. The window in my bedroom opened onto a small section of roof above the back porch. I had never snuck out before, never had a reason to. But I had thought about it, planned it out in my head during long nights when I could not sleep. I opened the window, climbed out onto the roof, and lowered myself down until I was hanging from the edge. Then I let go and dropped into the backyard. The October air hit me immediately, cold enough to see my breath. I was wearing only a thin hoodie over my t-shirt. I did not care. I walked around the side of the house, staying in the shadows, and made my way to the street. Behind me, I could still hear the faint sounds of the party, the laughter and music and clinking glasses. They did not know I was gone. They would not notice for hours, maybe days. I started walking. I did not know where I was going. I just knew I could not stay. The first 3 days after I left were the hardest of my life. I walked most of that first night following the main road toward the highway, then veering off onto smaller streets when I saw headlights approaching. I was terrified that my parents had called the police, that any moment a patrol car would pull up beside me and drag me back to that house. But no one came. No sirens, no searchlights, no concerned neighbors. Just the empty road and the cold October darkness. By morning, I had made it to a bus station in the next town over. I bought a one-way ticket to Hartford with 12 of my $40. The bus was nearly empty at that hour, just a few tired-looking people staring out windows or sleeping with their heads against the glass. I sat in the back row and watched the Connecticut countryside roll past, trying to feel something. Mostly I just felt numb. Hartford was bigger and louder than anywhere I had ever been alone. The bus station was crowded with people rushing in every direction, and I stood in the middle of it all, clutching my backpack straps, completely lost. I had $28 left. I bought a sandwich and a bottle of water from a vending machine, then walked out into the city with no idea what to do next. Those first days blurred together. I slept where I could find shelter behind a church one night under a bridge, another night in a 24-hour laundromat when it got too cold outside. I ate sparingly, making my money stretch as far as possible. By the third day, I was down to my last $9, and I was starting to understand what real hunger felt like. Not the "I skipped lunch" hunger I had known before, but a deep, gnawing emptiness that made it hard to think about anything else. I thought about calling home. I stood outside a payphone for almost an hour, the receiver in my hand, my finger hovering over the buttons. I could hear my mother's voice in my head telling me to come back, telling me she was sorry. But then I remembered the laughter. That bright, careless laughter, like my existence was nothing more than an amusing anecdote. I put the phone back and walked away. On the fourth day, I wandered into a small diner on the outskirts of downtown. I did not have enough money for food, but I knew diners usually gave free water, and I needed to sit somewhere warm for a while. The place was called Garrett's, a family-owned establishment with worn vinyl booths and a long counter lined with stools. It smelled like bacon grease and coffee, and my stomach cramped painfully at the aroma. I slid into a booth near the back and waited for a server. When she came, I asked for a glass of water and nothing else. She gave me a look, something between pity and suspicion, but she brought the water without comment. I sat there sipping slowly, trying to make it last as long as possible. I must have been there for about 20 minutes when a man approached my table. He was black, maybe 60 years old, with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He was wearing an apron splattered with grease stains, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had worked hard his whole life. "You waiting for someone?" he asked. His voice was deep but gentle. "Yes, sir," I lied. "My uncle. He is running late." The man studied me for a long moment. I could tell he did not believe me, but instead of pressing, he just nodded slowly. "Well, your uncle probably wants you fed when he gets here. You look like you could use something to eat." Before I could protest, he disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later, he returned with a plate piled high with scrambled eggs, bacon toast, and hash browns. He set it in front of me and slid into the booth across from me. "I cannot pay for this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Did I ask you to?" I stared at the food, then at him, then back at the food. My hands were shaking. I picked up the fork and took a bite of the eggs, and suddenly I was crying. Not quiet tears, but ugly, heaving sobs that I could not control. All the emotion I had been holding back for 4 days came pouring out in that moment in that dingy little diner in front of a stranger. The man did not say anything. He just sat there waiting, occasionally handing me napkins from the dispenser on the table. When I finally calmed down enough to speak, I told him everything. About my parents, the party, the laughter running away with $40 in a backpack. I do not know why I trusted him. Maybe I was just too tired to keep lying. His name was Garrett, and he owned the diner. He had bought it 30 years ago with his wife, who had passed away 5 years earlier. They never had children, a fact that seemed to sadden him when he mentioned it. When I finished my story, he was quiet for a long time, just looking at me with those kind, thoughtful eyes. "Here is what I can offer," he finally said. "I need help around here. Dishes, cleaning, whatever needs doing. You work for me, I give you meals and a place to sleep. There is a storage room in the back. It is not fancy, but it is warm and dry. You stay there until you figure out your next step." I wanted to say no. I had learned not to trust kindness, not to expect anything from anyone. But I was 16 years old, alone, almost out of money, and terrified. So I said yes. Working for Garrett saved my life. Not just physically keeping me fed and sheltered, but in every other way that mattered. He taught me how to cook, how to manage inventory, how to deal with difficult customers. More importantly, he treated me like I mattered. He asked my opinion about things, listened when I talked, remembered details about my life that even my own parents had never bothered to learn. Within a few months, Garrett helped me connect with a program for homeless youth that offered educational support. I studied for and passed my GED by the time I was 17. I worked at the diner during the day and took night classes at the community center. I saved every penny I could, setting aside money for the future. I was slowly starting to believe I could have. At 19, I enrolled in community college studying accounting. I was good with numbers, always had been, and it felt like a stable, practical path. I worked multiple jobs to pay my way. Deliveries in the morning, the diner during the day, office cleaning at night. I was exhausted all the time, but I was building something that belonged to me. Garrett became the father I never had. He came to my community college graduation, sat in the front row, and cheered louder than anyone when my name was called. He told me he was proud of me, and for the first time in my life, I believed those words were genuine. At 20, I transferred to a 4-year university on a partial scholarship. I was one of the oldest students in most of my classes, and I felt out of place in other ways too. Most of my classmates came from comfortable backgrounds with parents who paid their tuition and called every Sunday. I came from a storage room behind a diner and a childhood of being told I was a mistake. But I kept my head down and worked hard, and 2 years later I graduated with a degree in accounting and a job offer from a small firm in the city. Along the way, I found family. Not the family I was born into, but the family I chose. Marcus was a former homeless teenager like me who had turned his life around and become an electrician. We met at a support group for young adults who had aged out of the system. Elena was a single mother working as a nurse, struggling to raise her daughter while building a career. I met her at the diner where she used to come for coffee every morning before her shift. The three of us started having dinner together on Sundays, a tradition that continued for years. These people, Garrett, Marcus, Elena, they taught me what family really meant. It was not about blood or obligation or being born into the same house. It was about choosing to show up for each other day after day, even when it was hard. It was about love that was given freely, not earned through perfect grades or first-place trophies. By 22, I had my own apartment for the first time. One bedroom, 700 square feet with a view of a parking lot. It was the most beautiful place I had ever lived. I furnished it slowly, piece by piece, each item representing something I had earned myself. A couch from a thrift store, a table Garrett gave me from the diner's storage, a bed frame Marcus helped me build from scratch. Every object in that apartment told a story of survival and hope. I thought about my birth parents sometimes, especially late at night when sleep would not come. I wondered if they ever tried to find me, if they ever regretted what they said, if they even noticed I was gone. But I never reached out, and as far as I knew, they never looked. I was finally at peace with that. I had built a life without them, and it was a good life, better than anything they had ever given me. Which brings me back to that morning. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find my mother and father standing on my doorstep. They looked older than I remembered. My father's hair had gone completely gray, and there were deep lines around his eyes that had not been there 6 years ago. My mother was thinner, almost frail, and her perfectly styled hair now showed streaks of white. They were both crying, tears streaming down their faces, their hands clasped together like they were holding each other up. "Isolde," my mother whispered. "My baby, we finally found you." I did not invite them in. Not immediately. I stood in the doorway, my hand on the frame, keeping a barrier between us. 6 years of silence, and now they stood here crying, expecting what forgiveness? A tearful reunion. "How did you find me?" I asked. My voice was calmer than I expected. "Meredith," my father said. "She hired a private investigator. It took months, but they finally tracked you down." Meredith. My perfect sister, who had never really seen me at all. I wondered what had motivated her to search. Guilt, curiosity. Or maybe she just wanted to tie up a loose end that had been bothering her. "Why are you here?" My mother let out a sob. "We wanted to apologize. We wanted to tell you how sorry we are. We know what we said that night, what I said, it was unforgivable. But please, Isolde, please let us explain. Let us make it right." I stood there for a long moment looking at these two people who had brought me into the world and then spent 16 years making me feel like an unwanted guest in my own home. Part of me wanted to close the door in their faces to tell them they were 6 years too late to make them feel even a fraction of the rejection I had lived with my entire childhood. But another part of me, the part that had spent 6 years healing, knew that I needed this conversation. Not for them, for me. I needed to close this chapter properly, to say the things I had never been able to say, to finally let go of the weight I had been carrying since I was born. I stepped aside and let them in. My apartment must have seemed small to them compared to the house I grew up in. But I saw them looking around with something like wonder in their eyes, taking in the modest furniture, the framed photograph of me with Garrett, Marcus, and Elena on the wall, the small kitchen where I cooked meals for myself and my chosen family. We sat in the living room, them on the couch, me in the chair across from them. I did not offer them coffee or water. This was not a social visit. My mother spoke first. That night at the party I was drinking, I had too much wine and I said something stupid, something I did not mean. It was supposed to be a joke, a terrible, awful joke, and I have regretted it every single day since. "A joke," I repeated. "You called me a mistake in front of all your friends. You said I was the 1% that birth control failed to prevent. Dad agreed with you. Everyone laughed. And you are telling me it was a joke?" She flinched like I had slapped her. I know how it sounded. But Isolde, you have to understand, I love you. I have always loved you. I just did not know how to show it." "Did you know that I counted the photographs in our house? There were 37 of Meredith and 4 of me. Did you know that I won second place at the state debate championship and Dad asked why I did not get first? Did you know that Mom missed my 16th birthday because she scheduled a spa day with her friends?" The words poured out of me, 6 years of stored-up pain finally finding a voice. I told them everything, every memory of being overlooked and undervalued, every moment of feeling like a ghost in my own home. They listened in silence, tears running down both their faces. When I finished, my father spoke for the first time since we sat down. "I was wrong," he said, his voice rough. "I was so focused on my career, on appearances, on making sure the world saw us as successful, that I failed you. I failed you as a father in every way that matters. And I am sorry. I am so deeply sorry. It was the most honest thing I had ever heard him say. For a moment, I saw him not as the distant, disapproving father I remembered, but as a flawed man who had made terrible choices and was finally reckoning with them. I took a deep breath and said what I had come to understand over 6 years of rebuilding myself. I do not hate you. I spent a long time being angry, feeling worthless, blaming myself for not being enough. But I have done a lot of work to get past that. I have built a life I am proud of with people who love me for exactly who I am. I found a family, a real family, and they taught me what love is supposed to look like. My mother reached out like she wanted to take my hand, then stopped herself. Can we be part of your life again? Can we start over? I thought about it carefully. I am not ready to pretend everything is fine. I am not ready for Sunday dinners and birthday cards and acting like the last 22 years did not happen. But I am not closing the door completely either. If you want to rebuild a relationship with me, it has to be based on respect, not guilt, not obligation, real respect for who I am and the life I have built. They both nodded desperately, eagerly. My father wrote down his phone number and handed it to me. Whenever you are ready, we will wait as long as it takes. When they left, I sat alone in my apartment for a long time. The sun had shifted, casting long golden rays across the floor. I felt lighter somehow, like I had finally set down a burden I had been carrying my whole life. I picked up my phone and called Garrett. His warm, familiar voice answered on the second ring. Everything okay? Yeah, I said. I think it finally is. The thing I have learned, the lesson I want to leave you with is this. Your value is not determined by people who cannot see it. I spent 16 years trying to earn love from people who had decided not to give it. I nearly destroyed myself chasing approval that was never going to come. But when I stopped looking to them for validation and started building my own life, I found something better. I found people who chose me not because they had to, but because they wanted to. That is what family really means. I do not know what the future holds with my birth parents. Maybe we will slowly rebuild something new. Maybe we will exchange occasional phone calls and nothing more. Maybe they will disappoint me again. But whatever happens, I know I will be okay. Because I am not that scared 16-year-old running away in the middle of the night anymore. I am a man who built himself from nothing, who found love in unexpected places, who learned that the biggest mistake my parents ever made was not having me. It was not realizing what they had. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you found your chosen family, the people who love you for who you truly are? Share your story in the comments below. And if this video touched you, please give it a like, subscribe to this channel for more stories like this one, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and remember, you are never a mistake. You are exactly who you were meant to be. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.